Now moving on and taking a look at what our discussion is all about. The African continent is rich in minerals. The uptick in oil prices, impending elections and political transitions in many countries may reduce appetite for difficult reforms and could lead to further policy slippages across the continent. Now Mozambique and Republic of Congo missed Eurobond payments in 2017, while countries including Cameroon and Zambia agreed or began talks on bailouts with the IMF, and since Namibia and South Africa were downgraded to junk, sub-Saharan Africa has been left without any investment-grade foreign currency issuers. Africa's economy is projected to continue to rise to 3.2% in 2018 and to a further 3.5% in 2019, and this is according to the latest World Bank report released early 2018. Mauritius is often cited as one of the few African success stories, and this is with good reason. Destined for economic failure in the aftermath of independence due to its high poverty level and other vulnerabilities, including high population growth, ethnic tensions, substantial unemployment, and an economy greatly dependent on the production of sugar for international markets, this small island nation turned the tide by diversifying its economy and accomplishing an unprecedented structural transformation from agriculture and textile into services, notably financial, real estate and professional services. However, while the last decade was characterized by substantial economic growth, it was also marked by limited shared prosperity as the country's economic model began to encounter its first challenges and inequality increased. Now, between 2001 and 2015, the gap between the incomes of the poorest and the richest, 10% of households, increased by 37%. And according to the report, non-resource intensive countries are expected to expand at a solid pace, helped by robust investment growth. South Africa, Nigeria and Angola, the region's largest growing economies, will be slightly weaker than expected as the region is still experiencing negative per capita income growth, weak investment and a decline in productivity growth, but the rest of Africa will be more favorable. A significant number of 2018's top performers are non-commodity and intensive economies. The list is led by Ghana, followed by Ethiopia and Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal and Tanzania occupying the 5th and 6th spots respectively. Africa has 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies this year. The latest forecast places East African country Ethiopia at 8.2%, with the West African nation Ghana leading the continent at 8.3%. And now joining me in studio to unpack the issue of doing business in Africa is Tafadzwa Muguti, Deputy CEO of AfricaTonight. You know what, we'll come back to that one. I'm getting my names twisted over there, but we also have an entrepreneur joining us. We also have Kukule Tuklaba, CEO and founder of Adamo Pigs. Thank you so much for joining us. I think I got your name wrong. It's Awal Abdullah Fatai. You're an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
all right. Okay, I'm going to start with you. How is it when it comes to doing business in Africa?
Usually, as a young entrepreneur, and basically you have hopes, have high hopes basically. So starting up is usually the problem, and also accessing fund is usually one of the problems that we face. But for South Africa, for example, where I'm residing, it's a bit easier because you have opportunities to the basic things that make your business run, like power supply, internet, and basically all that. Though it may look challenging from the start, but it's been doing so good so far.
I'm going to invite in the Tafadzwa Muguti, Deputy CEO of AfricaTonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And now, does government policy really affect decisions as an investor?
Yeah, well, it's AfricaTonight.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm CEO for AfricaTonight, and I think one of the challenges that we do face is that when politicians make policies in Africa, we tend sometimes to be outward looking. the biggest question that this generation has been asking is, when government says investor, who is the investor? So you'd find that when you look at our DFIs, you look at institutions like DBSA, you look at institutions like IDC, you get a lot of private equity firms, a lot of venture capitalist firms and so forth. All the policies, when we say investor, are very outward looking. Now, investment is not only monetary. Investment can be even in IP, in intellectual property. And so what it means, like what Abdullah said, is that you have a lot of young people coming up with these technologies. You have a lot of skills that are in the country. And I tend to disagree with the African Development Bank CEO when he says that there's no jobs, there's no competencies. We have a lot of competencies. But what's happening is African policies for most governments are outward looking. So when the same caliber of idea comes from EU, all of a sudden we've got a breakthrough in Africa. When the same idea comes from America or from China, it becomes something like it's coming from heaven. And yet we've got proposals after proposals from African entrepreneurs, which government are simply not listening to.
All right. I'm going to invite Gugulethu Xaba, CEO and founder of Adamo Parks. It seems like when it comes to government helping out with investor confidence in the country, it seems as if it's not as great. But it seems we've seen Cyril Ramaphosa saying that he will be putting together a team to actually go out and advertise South Africa out there. What do you make of all of that?
Thank you very much. I think to my colleagues, and greetings to you as well, and the viewers at home. This is so important in a sense that when you look at Africa, like my brother has just indicated there, in terms of how policies are developed, we need to now look at your homegrown type policies that are developed from bottom up, in terms of looking at the whole business ecosystem or the entrepreneurial ecosystem of Africa, if we want to ensure that the sons and daughters of Africa succeed in their own continent. Foreign direct investment is good, but what is important is to look at what type of investment do we need. When I hear politicians, for instance, speak like our president has spoken here, I look at, the multinational enterprises which comes to our country, for instance, who are so loaded with research and development funding, who really put so much effort in ensuring that they open up new markets and they ensure that they dominate those spaces. But the big question then becomes, what is happening with local entrepreneurs who want to rise to the same level as these multinational enterprises, both in the country and South Africa, as well as in the entire African continent? So we need a political leadership that is really, number one, decisive in terms of their decision around policies, and who understand the plight of African people within this era, especially as we are talking in this month of May, which is called Africa Month, as well as the African Century. We need African leaders who are going to be bold enough to take decisions that are going to favor African development and African people's development, and in particular as far as issues of business and spurring forward the entrepreneurship is concerned.
I'm going to come over to you. When it comes to helping entrepreneurs in the continent, it seems as if more needs to be done, as you have said. Looking at some of the challenges that you are facing currently, how would it be better to maybe ease those challenges?
Thank you once again. I believe, based on what he said so far, some of the policies that have been made actually affect the upcoming and the growing entrepreneurs who are just getting into the business life. I think availability of whatever the government wants to provide for us, aside changing the policy to actually ease what we have access to as young entrepreneurs. So, to be fair, for me, while growing up, trying to grow my business, for example, I've had some challenges so far. Maybe because I'm a foreigner here in South Africa, but still, I still have access to some basic things that are being provided. Just that we would have loved an opportunity where there is more that's being given to us as young entrepreneurs coming into the industry, for example. I'll give an example. We had a project which we were trying to get off the ground.
What is your business about?
Basically, it's media business.
Okay.
We're into filmmaking and TV production, basically.
Okay.
So we were able to, we sent our proposal to the government assist, which is the DTI. And as a foreigner, you also need, there are some policies that are being set where you need to involve the local entrepreneur who are not foreigners in the country to actually work with you as partners so that these things can actually work. And so far, so I'll say it's been fair, to be honest. Maybe for me, well, I don't know if I should say I was lucky, but to be honest, I would say it's been fair, although the challenges are there. But basically, I just feel it's been good so far.
And what's your take on this? How has government been responding to upcoming entrepreneurs?
What's quite fascinating, Lesego, is that if you look at the panel that you have today, 3 different countries, educated in different backgrounds, but all trading within a cosmopolitan market. And what you tend to see is that African governments, or rather I'll put it to across most of the governments that I've been exposed to, we have a big problem where a couple of years ago they would call you small business enterprises. And 10 years later, the SMEs are still SMEs. And 20 years later, the SMEs will continue being SMEs. And that's the problem that we have within Africa, where there's no progressive growth. If you look at places like the United States, that's how Google, Yahoo, everything started. That's how the Silicon Valley started. If I look at, I was just going through today with my team some of the growth development funds that we have here. When they talk about SME development, some of them are offering between 50,000 rands to 250,000 rands. Now, what business can you compete with a multinational who's coming in with a DFI, with development funding from their country, millions and millions of dollars, and we're expecting locals to be able to compete with that? So I think we need to look at a situation where we don't need to categorize. I think this is the problem that we have in Africa. We tend to categorize any startup as an SME, so therefore they get a little bit of dossier of the support. And when a multinational comes in, government runs around, scrunches resources, and says, how can we also participate in this big project? So as a result, you continue having the African business space continue being taken as an SME. And quite frankly, I think some of the challenges spoken about, every single business has faced that same challenge. I'll give you a very good dynamic, a good example back home, or maybe here in South Africa rather. On average, there's close to between 150 to 200 kilometers of fiber which is being laid out. And you will see people digging everywhere. And if you look very carefully, there are a lot of black-owned small, medium enterprises which are being subcontracted. I can tell you for sure that most of those companies do not qualify for any funding from any bank. They don't have security. I can tell you of many subcontractors in different sectors who might get the contracts, but they're simply deemed not bankable. As a result, you'd find that they have access to higher interest finance, which makes them less competitive and so forth. Another good example is we recently had the Polonian cold meats issue. And whilst I was really focusing on how everyone seemed to focus on how many people were dying, what was shocking me most is that the entire country, we almost have one factory making the whole polony for the entire nation. And I'm starting to ask questions to say, are we saying there are no SMEs which can get into food processing? Can't we have 200-300 companies in South Africa making polony instead of one company making polony? And it gets worse. That same company is probably supplying the whole SADC. So you have situations like this where I think we need to start looking at empowerment, not being in giving black companies tenders, but letting them start going into industrial production, not being part of the supply chain in the fact that we are supplying the end result, but being able to control the manufacturing and the retail space as well, so that the dynamics start to change. Then you can start seeing small, medium enterprises become corporates. But as long as they don't have uptakers, we're still going to have those big corporates shouldering those small companies off under enterprise development, and we're never going to see substantive growth in Africa.
Now, we do have callers calling in to also just to give in their input. We have a Grant calling from Limpopo. Thank you so much of calling in. What is your comment or view this evening?
Yeah, I've heard all they've said, but part of it I can see in Africa,
Yes.
that most of the people who are being given that opportunity, it comes to us like we are giving one individual that opportunity, because well, we can get that kind of from for one SME or for 5 years or 6 years, but the way you will operate, you won't develop Africa, because you will say that most of employees are suffering from wages and everything. And even if we can say that, I agree with the one speaker was just take from now that we have to provide for more SMEs to be involved for those development. But I can say that most of companies or most of black companies I know, they're not developing Africa. If SIM, you can give me that opportunity to as an entrepreneur to develop. But you say that I don't give studies wages for my employees, which means it will result for many of my employees will stay poor.
Thank you very much, Grant. I seem to get what you're trying to get at. I just want to come to you and just pose this question where, when it comes to starting your business, we understand that you did obviously go through challenges and you were also given an opportunity. How did that opportunity come about, and how did you now try and get to the top after that?
I really want to comment on what he said based on the stuff he was talking about. Like I said, while growing up, while trying to set up your own business, you know that most definitely you're going to face some challenges. And the government policy, especially when you start looking at young people coming into the business, media, for example. Now the challenge is that our opportunity to access those funds are not there. Even when you know that, oh, this is what I actually want, because it's not about you just knowing what you want again, it's how to get there by seeking assistance from people who's already been there. Now, for instance, when you want to start a business, like he said, the government wants to give business to those who are already there, because we already make it. So for us who are just growing, it's usually hard for us to actually get to the point where we actually want to get to. So it's always very tricky, but it's always been the passion that is driving us. So.
I'm going to come to you. Are our banks geared to assisting the already rich and connected?
Yeah, if you may allow me, Lisa, just to say this too before I answer that directly. You see, in Africa, we are a resource-rich continent, and we have numbers. Those two key imperatives serve as a strategic push for us as a continent to really ensure that we start the kind of economic development that is going to assist all of these things that my colleagues are talking about. But importantly, on the question you've just asked in terms of our banks serving that role, there is something that Tafadzwa talked about in terms of our DFIs. If you were to just look at South Africa as an example, we've been talking about this thing for a longest time to say DFIs, they are called developmental funding or finance institution, but they really act and behave exactly like banks, many of them. This is practically there every day. If you're talking an entrepreneur, like Tafadzwa put it, we haven't raised a number of great entrepreneurs who are coming from black people in particular in this country, to an extent that we have a huge pool of people that we can say they are now black industrialists or huge industrialists who can compete with any other business across the world. So these are serious challenges. If you look at then our banks, literally they fall in the same category as well. They are simple focused on working with established business, and you have to prove to a bank that you do not need money for you to get money. That is what is happening in our world as entrepreneurs. But in South Africa, when you talk about the kind of developmental finance that we need, we haven't reached there. I mean, you had the treasurer of the ANC, I think, talking about the debate and the discussion around us, coming to an agreement to say, should we have a state bank or not? I mean, you look at the issue of VBS, for instance. We're debating that let's get African Bank becoming a black bank or get the post bank, and the talk keeps on continuing and continuing when we actually have got serious issues in this country in terms of unemployment, in terms of crime levels, which is mainly fueled by the very fact that there is a lot of people who are unemployed and many other factors, of course. So we need to be moving very quickly in terms of addressing these issues and not keep talking and having a meeting that is going to agree on the next meeting when it's going to be happening in terms of us addressing the challenges that Africa is facing. So this is the biggest challenge which, as I said when I opened, requires great leadership. Requires leadership that is really selfless, requires leadership that is going to ensure that it pushes what I think and I believe is an Afrocentric agenda to ensure that we become, we sort of come to a level where we play like the other biggest economies around the world, because we've got these resources, we've got the youth, which is over 60% of the African population, and we've got all the resources which need to be beneficiated. And if you now talk about your DFIs coming from outside with no proper setup locally and internally in our African context, to say how do we assist to favor local small businesses to grow. These people are coming up with massive power, and you've got unequals saying come compete equally, and it's never going to work if we continue like that.
I've got callers on the line waiting just to also give their comments. I have Bagiso from Free State. Thank you so much for staying on the line. What is your comment this evening?
Oh, okay. I'd like to greet everyone in the studio.
Good evening.
Yes. According to me, the way I've analyzed everything that has been going on, I believe we have something that is actually, I think we've reached a deadlock because honestly we've been analyzing and analyzing, and we need to get to a point whereby we start locating what needs to be done first. At this stage, we know that when you get into these businesses and you're trying to be competitive, you find that the monopoly capitals that they are there to block us out, most especially when you're black, obviously. Now, that's why the SMEs mostly when, from our side as a black people, I'm sorry to say that, as the black people from our side, you find that we are blocked out when we're trying to, here in Free State, I've got a number of examples here in Free State whereby I know some friends who tried to get into the poultry industry and they couldn't get whatever that they had to get in terms of like getting the food for their chickens and all that. They were given grade C, grade D food instead of grade A. And that was done purposefully. And they knew who those guys were when they wanted to order food and all that. So all I'm saying is, if we don't start platforms like the media institutions that can defend and show the masses what we actually need here in South Africa or Africa in large, then I think we can try to break into these sectors and break into so many things. Because people, I think, outside here, they need to learn. Because when you look at the big businesses, they thrive because of us. We are the ones who are supporting them.
Thank you very much, Pakiso, calling from Free State. And we also have Pila calling from Durban. Thank you so much for holding on the line. What is your question or comment this evening?
Good morning to the panel. Good evening.
Yes, good evening.
I think the biggest problem we have here in Africa, I would say it's self-hate, so to say, because mostly African businesses don't really get the support as compared to these multinationals. A simple example, sorry, just to mention names here. You see, like DJ Spoo, he started off his Mofire thing, and at some point there was a SABS issue, which I'm not sure what was the issue really there. But I'm sure after he corrected that, no one came back to say, okay, everything is okay now with the Mofire. Because he's continuing, he's selling it, and I'm sure he's corrected whatever that might have been wrong or not approved. But the media was quick to point out that there were issues with SABS so as to discredit his brand and everything. But he's driving you from a distance. You can see how hard he's trying to get his business going, to get his brand getting out there. But the support itself is nowhere to be seen. Because, I mean, how many energy drinks you got here in Africa, and most of them are actually from abroad. But if you've got a local brand, there's no support. It should start from us as Africans actually getting to love one another, so to support our businesses. Because it's not that we don't have the expertise. I'm in the field of electronic engineering. I've heard from international guys actually saying that South Africa is one of the greatest countries in terms of engineering, and that involves a lot of black people who are currently here, and they can be able to actually start off businesses, but without support. And the other thing, the funding, for instance, if you talk about starting a business in electronics, there's a lot of, I'll say, there's a lot of red tape there, because you have to go through a lot of approvals, and those approvals cost a lot of money. You will never be able to actually get the business off the ground, because without those approvals, there's no product to sell. So I think we really need a political will more than anything. Without the political will, we Africans are always going to be looked down.
All right. Thank you so much, Pila, calling from Durban. We have heard that was Bakiso and Pila, and basically they were talking about the deadlock that we have reached, especially as blacks. They've also mentioned that, as well as their products not being approved, as well as getting support from Africans as a whole. I just want to pose this to Tafadzwa. What do you make of what the callers have said so far?
You know, it's one of those situations where I truly get where the callers are coming from.
Yeah,
okay.
True.
For me, the biggest question I always ask is, what success story does Africa have of its own people? If you look clearly in food manufacturing, when I say Africa, I'm talking the broader scale of things. And unfortunately, I grew up in an environment where there was no black or white, but when you come to markets like South Africa, you have to start looking at things from that angle. So I like the example he gave of DJ Sbu, that he came up with his own brand, More Fire Energy Drink. And I would have looked at a situation where IDC could have jumped at that and said, wait a minute, what can we do to assist? Because this is the beverage side of it, right? And then you have institutions like SABS, which were created essentially, so standards boards and everywhere around the world, all these secretariats were created to set up standards. So be it in the FMCG, whatever sector it is, manufacturing, industrial production. And I'm looking at it even as now this big land issue is coming across, to say, what can we do as governments to create that capacity and bridge that gap? So if DJ Sbu, yes, did not have the capacity or didn't have the competencies, surely as government there could have been some support which has been given. So there's the Africa side of it. And then the other side of it is that Africa seems to be joining the queue in its own backyard. So if you look at our policies, if you want to start a mine today, where do you start from? Is there an institution where you can walk in and they'll say, this is how we can help you, if you have identified your own resources? If you want to start anything in food manufacturing, as they clearly said, what's going to happen? How many brands have you gone into Pick n Pay and ShopRite and it's written Muguti chickens or Lesego rice? We are yet to see African brands on the shelves. Now, if you jump across the border going to Zimbabwe, you'll find homegrown products on the market. You'll find that there's all this great products, great factories are making good products. Even soap, you can find locally made soap. When last did you buy something which is not Unilever? And so you need to start looking at it to say, if we're going to have this serious discussion about transforming Africa, I agree with my colleagues, it needs to get back to the fact that we need to start looking at policies which address certain requirements that needs to be done. And if you look at it the day, the confidence, the lack of confidence in African brands comes as a result of African governments not having confidence in their own African businesses. That's where it starts across from. And if African governments can start to do that, it becomes another story. I don't believe that there needs to be even a debate about should there be an African bank. Are we saying that since independence there are no black people applying for banking licenses in this country, such that we have to start having forums in Sandton? We're coming from places where South Africa is the only country on the continent without a bank owned by a black person. Try Google FSB. There's not even policies or directions on how you can clearly apply for a banking license. It's all misty. So these are some of the things that we need to start addressing, and they need to start being addressed head on. And I think from a political...
Let me just get some closing arguments, comments rather quickly, because we have to, we have to close now. What is your comment, your last comment?
It's still basically what we've been discussing so far. The fact that Africans, even ourselves, do we actually believe in what we do in-house? I take TV, for example. How many of our in-house contents, that is local contents, do we have on TV? And when channels want to commission, for example, if I'm coming up with a new concept that is locally, and I probably talk about another franchise, which is, let's say for a reality show, for example, and there's another reality show which is a foreign franchise. When a channel wants to commission for such, as a local producer that I am, and because the content I'm trying to produce is locally, is a local idea, the same funding, probably even the scope of the contents could be wider in terms of what I'm doing. But the fact that mine is local, how much will be given out to me as budget for production compared to what will be given out to that international content or franchise which the channel itself is buying. So it still boils down to the fact that we as Africans, we don't even believe in ourselves to say, okay, now let's invest in what Africans have. And how much do we Africans even consume of our own products? How many of our local content do we watch? Or do we want to stick to the international content that we see on TV? So it goes both coming to other production or other manufacturing as well.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming in and unpacking the issue of doing business in the African continent. Thank you so much. That was Tafadzwa Muguti, Deputy CEO of AfricaPacity. And we also had Awal Abdullah Fatai, entrepreneur. We also have Guguletu Aba, CEO and founder of Adama Picks. Yes. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Right now, we'll take a short break. We'll be back with more news and updates. Stay tuned.